Hello and welcome to PropertyBoss University. Today our topic of discussion will be screening. We have several vendors that interface with PropertyBoss, and hopefully by now you've selected a vendor of your choice and have received the credentials necessary in order to set up an interface through PropertyBoss. We'll be discussing how to set up the credentials in PropertyBoss and also running a test to make sure that the screening interface works appropriately. Let's start with basic setup. Today, for my example, I'll be utilizing a residential test database, as well as I'll be using Western Reporting as our screening vendor of choice. Follow along with me today as I show you a couple of things, tips and tricks to get you set up. First and foremost, let's go into Setup Preferences, located under Customize. Remember, when you're utilizing Setup Preferences, most often you have to have permissions in order to be able to make the changes, but also keep in mind that these changes are universal. So that means you'll be affecting more than just your own login presence and also your own system. You'll be affecting everyone, so be conscientious of that. We're going to look at applicant screening. When we click on applicant screening, you'll see that we have a checkbox. Once selected, we can utilize our credentials. Our screening vendor today is Western Reporting. I have been supplied the following client ID, a password, and what's called an SSO. That stands for single sign-on. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The first thing I'll want to do is make sure to enter these credentials, and then, very important, I'm going to click OK. OK will give me this opportunity to log back in. I do want to select yes. Once you have logged back in, return to the Setup Preferences, click on your applicant screening, ensure that your credentials are there, and next hit Update Product List. This will ensure there is a connection between the two softwares. A message will pop up asking if you want to continue. Be sure to click OK. Once that is done, you should receive a message that says Title Updated, and it'll show you the product list that you have discussed with your screening company. If you have questions regarding the product list or the pricing, please be sure to contact your account manager with the screening company that you are working with. Keep in mind that when you're discussing your products with the screening company of your choice, you will have choices of whether or not you can utilize a more moderate screening or a very strict screening, or potentially something that's very lenient. Also, you may have the choice of a scorecard. A scorecard would actually give you advice from the screening company based on your own criteria as to whether or not you would like to reject, decline, or accept with conditions. At any time, you may approach your screening company to change your requests, your products, or your criteria. Once we've completed this initial setup, what we're going to do is we're going to ask a couple of questions. In the case of Western Reporting, the only question that we have to answer is, are we going to warn for applicants under the age of 18? This is particularly important when we're discussing student housing. Once I click OK, I'm all set up. Now keep in mind, if you have multiple databases, you may be in a situation where you want to screen for each of those companies. If so, each would need its own credentials. Also keep in mind, if you have multiple properties under one database and you'd like separate screening billing opportunities, then be certain to talk to the screening company and you'll receive what are called child accounts under a master account. Your children or child accounts will be set up as follows. You'll go to the units and leases, and what you'll do is you'll actually click on the property itself, click on Edit this property, and you will be able to enter the credentials for the child account under a tab called Screening Info. If you don't have a Screening Info tab, be sure to talk to your PropertyBoss representative in order to set this up. You should have a Screen Client ID space, a Screen Client password, and a Screen SSO ID. Once these have been entered, you've clicked OK and saved that information. Now, that particular property will be isolated or separated from the rest under the master account, and that's specifically for billing purposes. In PropertyBoss, tabs under the Managing heading don't necessarily appear automatically. These are tied to permissions. This applicant screening is a screen that we'll be using simply to keep up with current screening and where we are in the process. For the actual setup, we'll be running all of the screenings directly out of prospects. So you'll need to have access to both the applicant screening and the prospect screen. Let's go ahead into Setup Preferences and see where those permissions are granted. Under Security Settings, I will go to the Create Users and Assign Security Permissions. Once I've determined which users should have access to PropertyBoss, I'll go into the users, click on the appropriate one, and I'm going to be using these permission tabs over to the side. Remember, if you don't have access to this section, it's because you haven't been granted permission. You'll need an administrator to perform these activities. I'm going to go into the add-on modules, and I want to make sure that I have Submit Credit and Criminal Reports checked. And I also want to make sure that I have Used Prospect Tracking. Now that you have selected the appropriate permissions, you should be all set to utilize your screening module. When you click on OK, your system should prompt you to log out and log back in. Please do so. For a brief recap, let's take a quick look. In your Setup Preferences, you have populated the applicant screening page, and here is what you should have. You should have your applicant screening vendor and the client ID, password, SSO. You also should update your product list with the products that you have selected along with your screening company. Additionally, set one as the default. Well, that's it, folks. That's it for today's lesson. Be sure to check out our next class, which will be creating and utilizing a test prospect, running them through the screening. Thanks. Make it a great day.